Welcome all of you. So, in the previous lecture we studied about ad hoc method of EIA, and today we will go to the next method, that is checklist method of EIA. There are different types of checklist methods, so we will look at that and the example. So, what is a checklist method? As you look at this picture, you can see the things, there is a list of items and then you are just checking down whether those items are proper or not. So, checklists are the standard list of different types of impacts associated with a particular type of project. So, it need not be always only the list of impacts, it can also be the list of activities involved in the project. So, check list, as the name indicates, you just make a list of items and then you check whether that those list of items is proper or not. So, similarly, so these are standard list which can be for the types of impacts associated with the project. It can be for the list of activities involved in the project. It can also be a list of experts involved in undertaking EIA of that project. Okay, it can be any list. Primarily, it is used for organizing information or ensuring that no potential impact is overlooked. Because we are talking about methods for EIA, and EIA is environmental impact assessment. So, the more emphasis is given on impacts. So, when we make this list of impacts, it is important that any important or any likely impact of a project is not overlooked. So, it should be included. So, that is why this organization of information systematically in the form of standard list is important, and it is a more formalized version of ad hoc approach. Like ad hoc was based purely on intuition, checklist is also similar to that, but it will involve expert, it will involve visits, it will involve collection of some data. So, it is a more formalized version of ad hoc approach, and limitation of checklist which gives the foundation for next type of methods that we are going to study, that is a network method, where we will be having cause and effect relationship. In checklist or in ad hoc, this relationship of explicit cause and effect between the activities or the impacts is lacking. So, those are the limitations for ad hoc and checklist both, but then still it is one of the preferred methods depending on the availability of resources, time and the scope of activity. So, different types of checklist methods. There are, I think most of the books or the reference literature would recommend 4 or 5 types of checklist method. In some of them you will find scaling and scaling weighing together, and in some of them they will be separate. The most commonly used checklist method for EIA is simple checklist method, which involves just a list of environmental parameters and a list of impacts or the list of activities and each activity causing a particular or specific impact. It is most commonly used. Descriptive checklist, even though it gives lot of information to each of the chosen impacts, a lot of background information, some information on how to measure those impacts or what is the description of the activity, all those descriptions would be given, but it is not very widely used. Then scaling or weighing, it is like simple checklist method, but there is a subjective scaling or what we can say importance based ranking or rating of the impacts as on the environmental parameters. And in weighing, like in scaling, we will have just the rankings given to it or some magnitude given to it, and weighing would be the importance given to that particular parameter or impacts magnitude with respect to other parameters. So, it can be in the scale of say 1 to 9 or 1 to 100, or it can be even weightages like say in terms of percentages 10%, 20%, 30%. So, that way weighing means importance given to the scales or the scores that we have already given to different environmental parameters. Final is the questionnaire. It is similar to Delphi method of ad hoc, but it is prepared on the basis of questions for public consultation. So, even though it is done by the team of experts, but when the questions are formed, they are addressed to the public or to the community getting impacted by the project, and they are consulted for their answers on the list of questions prepared by the team. So, simple checklist method, this is the most widely used. It just lists down the impacts or the activity, can be applied for overall project or for different activities in the project. We will look at a couple of examples so that it is clear. Similar example that we did earlier, construction project maybe of a highway through agricultural land. Now what will happen, like when we have to construct a highway through agricultural land, obviously it will be a government project, because when agricultural land has to be used for some infrastructure based projects, only the governmental organizations have that authority to change the purpose of the land use. So if a highway is going to be constructed, it is going to impact air, water, landscape, ecology. These are some resources or some environmental components listed down, and just like in ad hoc we had whether there would be impact or no impact, here in simple checklist also, even though it is a more formalized version of ad hoc, it looks similar to ad hoc, similar to detailed ad hoc. So nature of likely impacts, whether positive or negative, long term or short term, we have classified here. So if we construct a highway, air quality would be negative, water quality would be negatively affected, ecology would be negatively affected, landscape maybe we are not sure how it would be affected. Sometimes having highways, having roads make the area look more beautiful, it adds to the aesthetic sense, but sometimes having a tar highway in the middle of a field where there are farms from around, for some it will be a negative impact on the landscape also. So the team was not able to identify whether it is positive or negative, but whatever impact is there on landscape, it is definitely long term, because once that highway is constructed, it is going to stay there for a long time. Air quality is also going to affect it for long term, because as long as highway is there, there would be a lot of movement of vehicles, lot of transportation. Water quality impact, because of construction activity, even though it is negative, it will be for short term, and ecological impact is also for the short term. So that is how a simple checklist method matrix or a table would look like. But now here what we have done, we have assumed highway construction as one single project, and for the entire project overall we have listed down the impacts. Checklist involves also listing down the activities. So there are different activities involved in the construction of a road. So some of the activities are site clearance, earth moving or like levelation, leveling of land, lay foundations and import materials. Now the environmental component or the resource which gets affected are similar: air quality, water quality, landscape and ecology, and the tick mark means there is a impact of a particular activity. Now if we clear the site for construction of roads, obviously there will be some cutting down of trees from the agricultural land, some shifting of agricultural soil, so that will impact air quality, landscape and ecology. When we move the earth or a huge amount of soil and land sections, it will also impact air, water and landscape. And when you lay foundations, it will affect landscape, and with import materials also it will affect landscape. So it is just a way of representation, but here it gives us more like clarity on what activities of the construction project have impact on what components of the environment. See, both of these tables are correct, and both of them are simple checklist methods. In one we have assumed the entire project as one activity, and in other we have just listed down the specific activities. So here I have given only 4 resources, 4 activities, just for making you understand, but it can be n number of activities, n number of resources or environmental components which can get affected. So let us take one example of simple checklist. This is from Hausay-Thalhe-Neu Road project. It is a 5.5 kilometer bridge which was constructed over a like water body which was surrounded by a wetland and wildlife in Thailand. And this, I think this project was completed in year 2000 or 2003, when it was like fully reimbursed by the government. So if you look at the picture itself, this is a picture of the same project. You can see there is a lot of water, there are a lot of greenery. So it is a wetland, and wetland is one of the ecologically sensitive zones. So if you have to make a road construction in a ecological sensitive zone, there is a mandatory need of EIA, and if a simple checklist is applied for doing some preliminary EIA of the project, as per the methodology of simple checklist, what we can have, first we have the environmental components or items or resources which may get affected by this project. So fisheries, air quality, transportation, some socio-economic activities, and on the x axis or like the side columns, we have nature of likely impacts. It can be adverse or beneficial. and within adverse or beneficial we can have more categories like whether it is short term, long term, reversible, irreversible, what is L and W, local and wide. Some impacts would be restricted to the local regions, some impacts may go very wide across the region. If you remember the pollution problem in Delhi, the stubble burning, okay, one of the causes for air pollution in Delhi in the seasons of winter is stubble burning, right. There are other causes also like the construction activities happening in the Delhi region and vehicle transportation emissions, all those things are there. But if you look at the stubble burning, it happens in the states of Punjab, Haryana, and from there to Delhi there is a distance of around 200 kilometers. Okay. So, that rise in pollution of Delhi can be considered as a wide impact, and the localized impact would be restricted to the area where that stubble is being burnt. So, similarly in beneficial we can have these categories. It can SI is significant impact, N is normal impact. Sometimes impact is negligible, so we do not know whether to consider it or not, sometimes it is significant. So, these are different categories based on which we can categorize the impact. Similarly, in ad hoc method also we did the same thing. Okay. So, if you look at carefully, there is not much difference between ad hoc and a checklist. I would say like checklist is just the different type of or more formalized version of ad hoc method and some better sophisticated way of representing the ad hoc EIA method itself. So, this cross indicates that there is an impact, and you can see like for that highway project or for that bridge project in the wetland and forestry area, it impacted fisheries in long term. Adverse impact we are talking about. Air quality it impacted in short term, because it is a ecologically sensitive area, there is lot of greenery, lot of trees. So, it will adjust air quality in some time. So, the impact on air quality was short term, not a long term. Then what is this? Local fisheries and air quality at local region was impacted, not in the wider region. But some effects, some impacts were beneficial. Which one? Transportation. Because of that bridge, the transportation time reduced. The consumption of fuel to cover the same distance to transport goods reduced. So, that impact was beneficial. This add to socio-economic impacts also. It was not very significant, but a normal impact and in a longer term, because having that bridge increased the socio-economic value for the people using that bridge. So, these are some rows and some columns which I have explained, but the final simple checklist for this project as per the study by Lohani, it looked like this. So, here you have nature of likely impacts, adverse, beneficial. Here you have list of all the items that would get impacted by that project. All the short forms here, abbreviations are written here, okay. And you can see most of the impacts are adverse and some of the impacts are beneficial. Mostly socio-economic cultural impacts are on the beneficial side, positive side, and environmental related impacts are mostly on negative side, because this road was constructed in a ecologically sensitive area, where on one side we had wetlands and other side we had lot of wildlife. So, that was all about simple checklist method. That is the most commonly used checklist method. Now, descriptive checklist method, it includes both aspect and their impact information. So, it gives some additional information about each impact or activity that we list down in the simple checklist. Okay. So, it gives information about nature and magnitude of impacts rather than just identifying the impacts. If we just identify the impact or identify the activity, that is a simple checklist. Once you identify the impact and write some description about it, how to measure it or how it is taking place or how it is going to affect or what parameter of soil or air will get impacted, that gives, that is additional information. So, that when we provide that, the simple checklist becomes descriptive checklist. Taking the same example of construction of shed maybe for a bus stop near the river. So, environmental components can be soil erosion, surface water quality, groundwater. And now, the description of impact rather than just identifying the impact would be just tick mark here. Okay. When you describe, it tells here the excavation and removal of topsoil will cause erosion where along the edges of the banks of the river or along the edges of the roads. So, that is the more information given about impact on one of the environmental components. surface water quality. Because of construction of shed, there will be some sediments or waste which are in the nearby area, which may get runoff or into the river during rains, and that will increase the turbidity of the nearby river body. Okay. Groundwater, because the shed is not a very like huge building or a permanent type of construction, it is a temporary construction. So, it does not go deep. So, we do not need any deep excavation. So, there will not be any major impact on the groundwater. So, in simple checklist we would have done it like this, just identifying the impact, but here in descriptive, in addition to identifying, we described the impact. That is the difference, and since it will need lot of space in the tables, people do not often prefer to use this descriptive checklist method and stick to simple checklist methods. Third one is scaling checklist method. As the name indicates, scale down. So, each parameter is assigned a score on a scale of 1 to 10 or 1 to 100, and that is called as the magnitude of the impact. This type of method, both the scaling or scaling weighing, it is useful when we have to compare different project alternatives. For suppose we have to like make one construction and there are two ways that construction can be done. To compare those two options, we use this kind of scaling or scaling weighting based checklist method. What is scaling? It is just a rating or a grading system. We can just give them rank 1 to 3, 1 to 10. It can be even in terms of percentage, like I said earlier. It can be even in terms of ABCD, where you give A as best and D as the worst. For the same example, shed construction near the river, what would be the factor affected? Soil, wetting people and water. We categorize impacts on beneficial and adverse, and for scaling the beneficial impact or the adverse impact, we use the numbers 1 to 3, where 1 means low impact, 2 means medium impact, 3 means high impact. Now, when there is a construction activity, obviously there will be digging of soil. So, there will be disturbance to the ground microbes. So, it will not have beneficial impact on soil for sure. It will have adverse impact, but now how adverse? Is it very little, very high? No, it is medium. For waiting people, if people have to wait in like hot sun or rain, having that shade would help them at the bus stop. We are taking the same example, like shed construction maybe for a bus stop near the river. So, for waiting people, the impact would be beneficial and it is highly beneficial. So, number 3 is there. Then on the water quality, again the impact is adverse. It is not very medium or high, but low, and then again it depends on different assumptions or the area that we are looking into. How can water activity get affected? Because if people start using those shed, or even during construction of shed, if there is some breakdown of soil along the edges of the banks of the river or from the road or from the bus from the waste generated by people waiting at the bus stop, that may lead to contamination of river water, but possibilities are low. So, the impact magnitude is, the scale is on the lower side. The last one, questionnaire checklist method. So, as the name indicates, it has to be on the basis of several questions that would be asked to mainly the public or the community which are going to get impacted by a project. So, it involves a set of structured questions, and that will prompt the assessor or the project proposer who is doing that EIA study to think of all possible impacts. Okay. And the answers to that questionnaire will give us information about stakeholders' awareness and responses for the proposed project. So, we will gather a lot of information from all the stakeholders and the community about that project, about different factors of the project, what they feel about it, and based on that we can compile a EIA report. So, let us take one example of the same example of shed construction for bus stop near the river, and here it will be asked in the form of a question. So, issue is here in the first column, and will there be any impact, will there be any change or not, that is listed here, yes, no or not applicable. Sometimes we may formulate a question, but when we go for interviewing people, we may realize that that question is not applicable for this particular project. First issue, waste. Will there be change in waste dumped nearby or in the river? Yeah, I think there will be change because of people gathering at bus stop. There may, because of the bus stop and the shed, there may be some vendors selling some eatable items, and the waste may end up being disposed nearby river or along the banks, which may affect the generation of waste. Hydrology, will there be any hydrological changes due to civil construction or foundation? There may or may not be, because it is not a very big construction, but then it will depend on the hydrological property of that area. Noise, will it increase existing noise levels in the vicinity? Because buses would be making frequent stops there, but not sure, because buses used to stop earlier also. Having a shed, it's only for the comfort of the people, but yeah, if more people start gathering there waiting for the bus, that may lead to increase in the noise. So, it may have yes. Transport or traffic, will it create congestion leading to additional traffic? It may be because of having that bus stop, but if there is a proper space for bus to go off the road and stand, I think it may not also. So, that is why, like, whenever EIA reports are made, listing or identifying impacts is the first stage, but next stage itself is the mitigation of that impact. So, if you realize that there is no extra space for bus to stand, what can be the mitigation measure? Provide some extra space for bus to halt, so that it does not affect the ongoing traffic and lead to congestion. Public opinion, will it conflict with any other environmental plans? That needs to be checked with the people, because construction of shed, when it is taken, we need to check if it is not conflicting with some other environmental plan of the public or of the local municipal body. Then comfort, will it provide safety and comfort to public waiting for bus? Yes, it will provide, right. So, that is a simple example of questionnaire method. So, what we have covered so far is different types of checklist methods. Now, if you look at each of these methods had some attributes or some specific feature. So, let us look at the comparison of all these 4 or 5 types of checklist methods: type of method, key feature and the nature. Simple checklist, it is just a basic standard list, no details or no like information on type or quality of activity or impact. So, it is mostly qualitative in nature. Descriptive, it will be a list, but with explanation for each item. There will be explanation for activity, there will be explanation for the impact, and this is also qualitative in nature. In scaling, because we give scores or rating or ranking, we try to make it semi quantitative. Okay. And when we give ranking as well as importance, like scores plus weights to each of the activities or impacts associated with that activity, ultimately we would get something in terms of numbers. So, it is a quantitative. And questionnaire, instead of listing down items or giving information about it, we ask questions and get the views of the stakeholders and the community. So, it is mainly qualitative in nature. So, most of these checklist methods are qualitative, ad hoc methods are also qualitative. So, only when we add scales and weights it becomes semi quantitative or quantitative, but in general, so as far as name goes, ad hoc and checklist methods would be mostly qualitative. So, that brings us towards the end of the lecture. To summarize, we started with checklist method, what it is, and different types of checklist methods, right. Simple, what was the other one? Descriptive, then scaling and scaling or weighing based, and last one was questionnaire based. And each of these methods have its own pros and cons, but the most widely used checklist method is a simple checklist method, and that is why we saw I think 2 or 3 examples, and one example of that bridge construction project in Thailand, we saw it in detail how this simple checklist method was used to list down all the environmental components that would get affected by that bridge project. And though broadly we categorize impacts in 2 types, adverse and beneficial, but within adverse and beneficials we had several sub classifications, whether it is long term, short term, local, wide, significant, non significant, reversible, irreversible, and that gave us one clear crisp summary of EIA findings for that project. And then for other examples also, for other types of checklist methods also, we saw the example of that bus stop shed construction which is near the river, and how different methods would approach the same problem differently. Only the representation would be different. Some findings may be different because of the difference in the foundation or the basis of those methods. But yeah, most of these checklist methods are qualitative except for scaling and weighing. So, with this we will stop here. Thank you.